My rich aunt left me a $2 million house and $4 million in cash. My parents, who abandoned me at a bus stop 16 years ago, just crashed the will reading. They claim they are my legal guardians and have rights to every penny. They have no idea what my aunt prepared for them. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever had to fight for what is rightfully yours, hit that like and subscribe button. You will not believe what happens next. The heavy oak door of the law office bursts open, slamming against the interior wall with a crack that makes me jump. The sound echoes in the quiet, expensive room. And just like that, the sterile peace is shattered. A cloud of cheap, cloyingly sweet perfume, like rotten fruit and alcohol, floods the room. It is a smell I recognize deep in my bones. It is the smell of her. Imani. Oh, my baby girl. My blood turns to ice. Every muscle in my body seizes. I do not need to turn around. I know that voice. It is a voice that has haunted my nightmares for 16 years. Brenda. My mother. She and Jerome, my father, stumble into the room. They are a stark contrast to this tasteful, wealthy office. They look like they have hit a slot machine jackpot and gone shopping at the cheapest store in the mall. Jerome, now 48 and looking puffy, is wearing a cheap, shiny gray suit that pulls too tight across his stomach. A fake gold watch hangs loosely on his wrist. Brenda, 46, is poured into a bright red polyester dress that is straining at the seams. Her makeup is caked on, and her laugh is a loud, harsh cackle that does not belong here. "Look at you!" Brenda shrieks. She rushes toward me, her arms flung wide, her face contorted in a mask of fake grief and joy. All grown up. Oh, my heart! I react without thinking. I flinch, shoving my heavy leather chair back so hard that it screeches across the polished wooden floor. The sound is ugly. I do not stand up. I just stare at her, my face a cold, blank mask. I can feel Mrs. Hayes's eyes on me, but I cannot look away from them. The intruders. Brenda's arms drop awkwardly to her sides. The fake smile flickers. Her eyes, which I now see, are bloodshot, narrow. "Well, what kind of greeting is that?" she sputters, trying to sound offended. "Is that any way to greet your mother?" I cannot find my voice. All I can feel is the phantom chill of a bus station bench. Jerome steps forward, trying to puff out his chest. He puts on his father voice, a tone I remember he always used right before a lie, right before he asked for money. "Show some respect, girl," he booms, his voice too loud. "Is that how you talk to your parents? We came all this way. We have not seen you in— what has it been, honey? 16 years. 16 years. The number hangs in the air. The room seems to fade. The smell of leather and old paper is replaced by the smell of diesel exhaust and stale popcorn. The quiet hush of the office is gone, replaced by the tinny sound of a Greyhound bus announcement for a departure to Mobile. I am 8 years old. I am sitting on a hard blue plastic chair. My legs are too short to touch the floor. I am clutching the worn-out teddy bear Aunt Serafina had given me for my birthday. Jerome crouches down, his smile oily and thin. He smells like beer. "You wait right here, little bird. Me and your mama are just gonna grab a snack for the ride. You be good now, you hear?" He ruffled my hair. I remember I leaned away from the smell. I remember watching them walk toward the exit. Brenda did not even look back. Not once. She just followed him out the sliding glass doors and disappeared into the city light. I waited. I watched the sun go down through the dirty windows. I watched the night janitor sweep the floor. I watched the morning commuters come in. I waited for 2 days, huddled in that chair, until a security guard finally bought me a hot dog and called social services. 2 days. "What are you doing here?" My voice comes out low and flat, colder than I expected. It cuts through Brenda's nervous fidgeting. Jerome's fake fatherly expression darkens. "What are we doing here?" He scoffs as if I am the one being rude. We are here for the will reading, of course. Serafina was your mother's sister. That makes her my sister-in-law. This is family business. Family, I repeat. The word tastes like ash in my mouth. Brenda, seeing her opening, tries to produce a tear. She dabs at her perfectly dry eye. We heard about poor Serafina. May she rest in peace. Our hearts are just broken. Broken. We came as soon as we heard. To support you, baby. Our little girl. And to see what she left us. Jerome adds, his eyes darting around the room, sizing up the expensive furniture. He spots the coffee service on the sideboard. Is that coffee good? We could use some. He starts to walk toward it as if he owns the place. Mr. Washington. Mrs. Hayes finally speaks. Her voice is not loud, but it slices through the air like a razor. Jerome freezes. Please take a seat. You were not invited, but since you are here, we can proceed. Though I assure you this will not go the way you think. Jerome was still arguing, his voice getting louder as he demanded coffee, when the door opened again. This time, it opened quietly. In walked my Uncle Marcus, Aunt Serafina's younger brother. Marcus always looked like a man apologizing for taking up space. He was short, balding, and always wrung his hands. But the person with him, his wife Chloe, was the exact opposite. Chloe is white with a sharp blonde bob that looked like it could cut glass and eyes like little ice chips. She was a corporate lawyer, and she never ever let anyone forget it. She surveyed the room in one quick, calculating glance, her expensive heels clicking on the hardwood. Her eyes landed on Jerome and Brenda, who looked messy, loud, and cheap. I expected her to sneer, to show the same disdain she always showed everyone she felt was beneath her. Instead, I saw recognition, a flicker of a smile. She gave Jerome a small, sharp nod. Then Chloe leaned into Marcus, who was already fidgeting with his tie, and whispered just loud enough for the whole room to hear. See, Marcus, I told you they would be here. Her voice was a low, smooth hiss. Brenda is blood after all. Serafina can't just cut out her own sister. The law doesn't like that. My stomach turned. Battle lines. She was already drawing battle lines. She was siding with the people who threw me away at a bus station, all because of blood. A concept they only seemed to care about when money was on the table. Mrs. Hayes, ignoring all of them, finally cleared her throat. The sound was like a gavel. Now that everyone is present, she said, her eyes landing on Jerome with pointed disapproval, we may begin the reading of the last will and testament of Serafina Johnson. Jerome and Brenda scrambled to find chairs, sitting on the very edge, practically vibrating with greed. Chloe and Marcus sat opposite them. Chloe looked composed, like a scientist watching an experiment. Marcus just looked like he was about to be sick. Mrs. Hayes put on a pair of sleek, black-rimmed glasses. I, Serafina Johnson, being of sound mind and body. She skipped the usual legal formalities and got straight to the meat. We will begin with the specific bequests. To my brother, Marcus Johnson. Marcus physically sat up straighter. Chloe allowed herself a small, tight smile. This was it. Mrs. Hayes read, To my brother, Marcus Johnson. I bequeath the sum total of the $50,000 personal loan he took from me on June 10, 2018. I am forgiving this debt entirely on the sole condition that he never again claims to be a good businessman in public. The silence in the room was immediate. Marcus's face turned a deep, blotchy red. He looked like he couldn't breathe. Chloe's face went white, her thin lips pressing into a single angry line. 50,000, Marcus sputtered, his voice cracking. That was a gift. She said it was a gift. Mrs. Hayes, without looking up from the paper, replied, The signed loan agreement, complete with an amortization schedule, is in my file, Mr. Johnson. She was forgiving the remaining balance of $42,800. You are welcome. I heard a snicker from across the room. I looked over. Jerome and Brenda were openly laughing at him, whispering to each other. They felt superior. They felt safe. They thought their payday was just around the corner. Mrs. Hayes turned the page. Her face remained impassive. Now, as to the remainder of my estate. all real and personal property. This includes my primary residence in Buckhead valued at $2 million, my investment portfolio, and all liquid cash totaling an estimated $4 million. Brenda was literally holding her breath, her hand clamped over her mouth. Jerome was tapping his foot so hard it was making a noise, a huge, greedy grin splitting his face. Yes, yes, he muttered, leaning in. I leave it all, Mrs. Hayes read, to my beloved niece, who has been a daughter to me in every way that matters, Imani Washington. The world stopped. I could not hear. I could not breathe. 4 million the house. Me. I just stared at Mrs. Hayes, sure I had heard her wrong. The silence was shattered by Brenda. What? It was not a word. It was a sound. A sound from an animal full of rage and disbelief. She leaped out of her chair, her face turning a mottled purple. That brat, she gets everything. What about me? I am her sister. I am her blood. Jerome was pale, his eyes wide with shock. This is a mistake, you old... He pointed a shaking finger at Mrs. Hayes. You tricked her. She was a sick old woman. She didn't know what she was doing. Mrs. Hayes held up a single imperious hand. If you continue to shout, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet, I will have security remove you. This is a legal proceeding. She waited. It was the longest 30 seconds of my life. Brenda, fuming and crying real tears of rage, finally collapsed back into her chair. As I was saying, Mrs. Hayes continued, her voice icy, I leave everything to Imani. However, my heart, which had just started to beat again, froze. However, the single worst word in the English language. However. Mrs. Hayes read, and I saw her look at me just for a second, her expression softening. My client was very aware of the world. The will stipulates that while Imani is the sole beneficiary, she will not gain full unrestricted access to the capital, the $4 million, until her 25th birthday. I did the math in my head. I am 24. My birthday is in 10 months. Until that date, Mrs. Hayes said, her voice becoming formal again, the estate's finances and all decisions regarding them will be managed by her legal guardian. A new silence fell over the room. But this one was different. It was calculating. I looked at Marcus and Chloe. Chloe was already whispering in Marcus's ear, a new sharp, calculating look in her eyes. They were not out of it yet. But then I heard a sound that chilled me more than anything else. A low chuckle. I turned. Jerome was looking at Brenda. The shock on his face was gone. It was replaced by a slow, triumphant, and absolutely terrifying smile. He straightened his cheap, shiny tie. He stood up, puffing out his chest. Well now, Jerome said, his voice dripping with false authority, as if he had just won the lottery. That makes things simple, doesn't it? We are her parents. Brenda's fake sobs stopped instantly. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, as she understood exactly what he was saying. That's right, Jerome continued, walking toward the head of the table, looking at Mrs. Hayes as if he was her new boss. We never signed any papers. We never gave her up. We are by law Imani's legal guardians. I guess that means we will be managing that $4 million. Just to, keep it safe for our baby girl. Jerome's words hung in the air, thick and toxic. He beamed, his chest puffed out, already spending the $4 million in his head. He looked at me, his eyes full of a disgusting, possessive pride. From now on, parents will be managing the money for you, daughter. He said the word daughter, tasting like poison in his mouth. Just to keep it safe. Right, lawyer. He turned to Mrs. Hayes, expecting her to nod, to just be a functionary in his new fantasy. Brenda was right beside him. Her entire demeanor changed. The fake grief was gone, replaced by a greedy, triumphant light in her eyes. She was already practicing her rich lady posture, looking around the room as if deciding which curtains to change first. That's right, Jerome. A girl needs her mother at a time like this. All this business. It's too much for her little head. I felt a cold dread colder than the bus station floor. The trap was closing. After 16 years of freedom of safety, the monsters from my past had found me. And this time they had a legal right to drag me back. I looked at Mrs. Hayes, my last hope, but how could she fight this? They were biologically my parents. Even Marcus and Chloe looked stunned. Chloe, the sharp white lawyer, was staring at Jerome with a new horrified expression. She had planned to fight a will, not be locked in a battle with the legal guardians of the beneficiary. She saw her own plan, her own path to the money suddenly become 10 times more complicated. The only person in the room who seemed completely unfazed was Mrs. Evelyn Hayes. She let the silence stretch. She let Jerome's arrogant question hang in the air. She watched him preen, watched Brenda practically start measuring the desk. Then Mrs. Hayes slowly, deliberately took off her reading glasses. She folded them and placed them on the thick will. She looked up not at me but straight at Jerome. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a hunter. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice dropping to a calm, precise, and absolutely lethal tone. "You raise an interesting point. Let's talk about parental rights." Jerome's smile faltered just a little. "Yeah, let's. We got 'em." "Do you, Mrs. Hayes?" replied, her voice full of mild curiosity. She turned to her large leather briefcase on the floor. She clicked it open. She pulled out not a single paper, but a thick bound document with a blue cover, like a court filing. "Because my records prepared meticulously by your late sister-in-law suggest otherwise." She slid the document across the polished mahogany table. It stopped directly in front of Jerome. He stared at it, his bluff starting to crumble. "What's this? More of your lawyer tricks? We're her parents. It's simple." "Is it?" Mrs. Hayes leaned forward. "That Mr. Washington is a conformed copy of a final decree from the Fulton County Superior Court. Please read the title on the cover." Jerome squinted. He suddenly looked like a man who didn't read often. It says, "Petition for termination of parental rights." The blood drained from his face. Brenda, not understanding, just looked confused. "Termination? What's that? What's she talking about, Jerome?" "She's talking about this," Mrs. Hayes said, her voice rising, taking command of the room. "She is talking about the document you and Mr. Washington both signed in front of a notary 14 years ago. The document in which you both willingly and permanently gave up all legal rights, claims, and privileges to the child known as Imani Washington." I felt the air leave my lungs. What Brenda looked at Mrs. Hayes, then at Jerome, her face a mask of confusion. "What? Jerome, what is she? And you did it." Mrs. Hayes continued, her voice like a hammer striking an anvil. "In exchange for a cash payment of $5,000 delivered by my client Serafina Johnson, who wanted to ensure you would never bother this child again." The room exploded. "No!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking the sound utterly raw. "No, that's not true. She said those were school papers, some kind of enrollment. She, Jerome." Brenda turned on him, her painted nails grabbing his cheap suit jacket. "Jerome, you told me it was for school. You told me she was giving us $5,000 for her school." Jerome was white as a sheet. "This is a lie. It's forgery. We would never. That's our baby." "It is not a lie," Mrs. Hayes said, her voice cutting through the hysteria. "And it's not forgery. Your signatures were notarized. The judge's decree is final. You terminated your rights. You have no claim." I was reeling. My Aunt Serafina. She had bought my freedom. That $5,000, it was the price they put on me, the price she paid to save me. But Mrs. Hayes was not finished. Oh, she was far from finished. She let them scream for another moment, then she held up her hand. "But wait," she said, a cruel, beautiful edge to her voice. "There's more." She reached back into her briefcase. She pulled out a second document, this one thicker, with a gold seal from the court. "You see," she said, "my client was not a woman who left things half done. She knew you. She knew what you were. She knew that just terminating your rights was not enough. She needed to build a fortress around Imani. She dropped the second document on the table. It landed with a heavy final thud. What is that? Chloe the lawyer whispered. She was no longer a shark. She was just a spectator. Mrs. Hayes looked directly at me. Her eyes were no longer cold. They were full of a fierce protective warmth. This Imani, she said, is the final sealed decree of adoption. My hand flew to my mouth. Jerome and Brenda stopped breathing. You see, Mrs. Hayes explained, turning back to the two of them, the termination of your rights was just step one. Step two was this, filed and finalized 14 years ago. You were not just removed as parents, you were replaced. She stood up to her full height, a queen in her own courtroom. Serafina Johnson was not just your Aunt Imani. She was by law your legal mother. The words hit me. Mother. She wasn't my aunt. She was my mother. She had made it legal. She had made me hers in a way no one could ever dispute. Mrs. Hayes turned her gaze back to the two people who had abandoned me. Her voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of pure, simple fact. You are not her parents. You are not her guardians. You are in the eyes of the law. Legal strangers. You have no more right to this child or her estate than the mailman who delivers her letters. Brenda let out a sound. A long, hopeless wail as the $4 million, the house, the entire fantasy dissolved into dust in front of her. She crumpled, falling back into the chair, a broken, greedy doll. Jerome just stood there, his mouth open, his face purple with a rage so profound he could not even speak. He had been outsmarted, outplayed, and legally castrated by a woman who was now in her grave. Mrs. Hayes walked to the door and held it open. Your presence is no longer required, she said. Get out of my office. Jerome just stood there, his mouth open, his face turning a dark, blotchy purple. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning. Brenda let out a long, hopeless wail, a sound of pure raw greed being denied. She crumpled, falling back into the chair, a broken, greedy doll. Marcus and Chloe just watched. Marcus looked terrified, like he was next. But Chloe, the white lawyer, her face was a mask of cold calculation. She was not defeated. She was processing. She was adapting. Get out! Mrs. Hayes's voice was final. She was already holding the heavy office door open. Jerome finally moved. He lunged not at Mrs. Hayes, but at the table as if to grab the papers. This is not over. You. Two security guards who I had not even noticed standing in the hall stepped in. They were large men. They did not touch him. They just stood there. A clear, silent threat. Jerome deflated. He pointed a shaking finger at me. You think you won? You think you won, girl. You'll be begging us to come back. You hear me? Jerome, let's go, Brenda sobbed, pulling at his arm, her makeup running in black streaks down her face. They were escorted out, a messy, loud, pathetic exit. Marcus grabbed Chloe's arm. Let's go, honey. This is... Chloe stood up, smoothed her skirt, and picked up her expensive leather bag. She did not look at me. She did not look at Mrs. Hayes. She just gave one long, analytical look at the two adoption decrees sitting on the table. Then she turned and followed her husband, her heels clicking cleanly on the floor. The door shut. The silence that fell was the most profound, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 16 years. I looked at Mrs. Hayes. She was my mom, legally. In every way that mattered, Imani, Mrs. Hayes said, her professional mask softening. She loved you fiercely, and she was a brilliant, brilliant woman. She never lost a fight, not even this one. I thought it was over. I really thought it was over. That night, the scene was very different. The air was not crisp and climate-controlled. It was thick, humid, and smelled like stale cigarettes and bleach. In a cheap motel room off the I-75 highway, the four of them were gathered. Jerome, Brenda, Marcus, and Chloe. The dim, flickering neon sign outside cast a sick red glow on their faces. Brenda was lying on the unwashed bedspread sobbing. $4 million, 4 million, and that witch. She left Marcus a debt. Jerome was pacing his shiny suit jacket thrown on the floor. She tricked us. That old hag tricked us. Signed papers, $5,000. Who remembers $5,000 from 14 years ago? I do, Marcus muttered, sitting at the small wobbly table. She never let me forget that 50,000. All of you shut up. The voice was Chloe's. She was sitting in the one clean-looking chair, her laptop already open. She was not crying. She was not yelling. She was working. The other three stopped looking at her like children. Your screaming is pointless, Chloe said, her voice cutting through the self-pity. The adoption is sealed. The guardianship angle is dead. Wailing about it is a waste of energy. So that's it, Brenda wailed. She wins. That little stray wins. Chloe looked up from her screen, and her eyes were like ice chips. No. We just changed the attack vector. Jerome stopped pacing. What? What vector? What are you talking about? Chloe sighed, as if explaining something to a very stupid child. We cannot argue that you are her guardians. Fine. So we argue that Imani should not be the beneficiary. How? Marcus asked. The will, Chloe said. We contest the will itself. It is a common legal strategy in Georgia. We file a petition. On what grounds? Jerome asked, hope dawning in his eyes. 2, Chloe said, holding up 2 fingers. First, testamentary capacity. We argue that Serafina was not of sound mind, that she was old, sick, confused, and did not know what she was doing when she signed that will. Jerome and Brenda looked at each other. A slow, ugly smile started to form on Jerome's face. She was sick, he whispered. Second, Chloe continued, and this is the stronger one. Undue influence. We argue that Imani, as the sole caregiver living in that house, isolated her mother. We say she manipulated her, coerced her, poisoned her mind against her real family. We paint Imani as a greedy, scheming brat who took advantage of a dying old woman. The air in the room changed. The defeat was gone. A new toxic energy replaced it. Yes, Brenda hissed, sitting up on the bed. Yes, that is exactly what happened. She kept us away. When we tried to call, that girl always answered. She never let us talk to our sister. Exactly, Chloe said, her fingers starting to type. Jerome, Brenda, you are the grieving biological family desperate to reconnect. Marcus, you are the loving brother who was pushed away. And Imani is the parasite who moved in and stole the family fortune. But what about that lawyer? Marcus asked, his voice nervous. Mrs. Hayes, she's smart. Mrs. Hayes is a good lawyer, Chloe said, not looking up. Which is why we need to be better. We do not need to win in court, not yet. We just need to file. We need to make a stink. We need to prove Serafina was crazy and Imani was a manipulator. Prove how? Jerome asked. Chloe finally looked up, her face lit by the pale glow of the laptop. We find evidence. We find witnesses. Doctors, nurses, neighbors. Someone had to have seen how crazy Serafina was. Someone had to have seen how controlling Imani was. A dark shared understanding filled the room. And, Chloe added, if we cannot find evidence? Jerome nodded, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. We make it. The days that followed were a blur. I left my small rented apartment, a place that had been my safe haven, and moved into the house in Buckhead. It was not a house, it was a mansion, a beautiful sprawling brick and ivy fortress of a home that Aunt Serafina, that my mother, had built. It was a testament to her success, a symbol of everything a black woman from her neighborhood was told she could never have. The ceilings were high, the floors were dark polished wood. Art from black artists, vibrant and powerful, hung on every wall. but I felt like a ghost. I would walk from the massive state-of-the-art kitchen with its marble island big enough to sleep on, to the formal living room where a grand piano sat silent in the corner. I would sit on the edge of a silk sofa, feeling too small for the space, too small for the life that was now supposedly mine. This was her home. Every inch of it still smelled like her, a faint, clean scent of expensive perfume and old books, and I was utterly, terribly alone. The victory in the lawyer's office felt a million miles away. It was a brief, bright flash, and now the silence of the house was creeping in, filling me with doubt. Jerome and Brenda were gone, banished. But the shadows they cast were long. I tried to find a routine. I started unpacking my few boxes of clothes into a walk-in closet that was bigger than my entire old bedroom. I made coffee in a machine that seemed more complicated than my car. I was trying to feel like I belonged. I was sitting at the massive kitchen island nursing a cup of coffee and looking at a stack of mail, mostly condolence cards, when the doorbell rang. It was not a bell, really. It was a deep, resonant chime that echoed through the foyer. I was not expecting anyone. I walked to the massive front door and looked through the peephole. A man in a cheap-looking polo shirt holding a thick envelope stood on the porch. He looked impatient. I opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" "Imani Washington." He grunted, not meeting my eyes. "Yes," I said. He shoved the thick manila envelope at me. "You've been served." He turned and walked away before I could even close my hand around it. Served. The word was cold, clinical. I shut the heavy door, the click of the lock echoing in the empty hall. My hands were shaking. I sat down on the bottom step of the grand curved staircase. I looked at the envelope. It was from the Fulton County Court. I ripped it open. I did not understand all the legal language, the wherefores and heretofores, but I understood the words at the top. Petition to contest will. And I understood the names. Jerome Washington and Brenda Washington plaintiffs versus Imani Washington defendant. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was real. Chloe's plan. It was all there, laid out in cold black ink. Undue influence. Lack of testamentary capacity. Isolation of the deceased. They were painting me as a monster, a greedy, manipulative parasite who had wormed her way into a sick old woman's life and stolen the family fortune. They were claiming my mother, the sharpest, most brilliant woman I had ever known, was senile, confused, and did not know what she was doing. The beautiful house suddenly felt like a prison. The high ceilings felt like they were pressing down on me. I was not safe. The paper in my hands was a declaration of war. They were not just coming for the money. They were coming for her. They were coming for my mother's memory. They were trying to poison the only good, pure thing I had ever had. A new kind of anger, cold and sharp, began to replace the fear. The legal papers were just the start. The real attack came 3 days later. I was in the library, a room lined with my mother's books, trying to find a novel, trying to escape. It was evening. Suddenly, a sound shattered the quiet. Boom! 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 It was not a knock. It was a pounding. Someone was hitting my front door with their fists. My heart leaped into my throat. I crept into the foyer. The pounding came again, faster this time, vibrating through the heavy wood. Boom, 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 boom! Open this door, girl! I knew that voice. Jerome. I know you're in there, open up. This is my house. This is family property. You think you can just steal from us? I ran to the peephole, my hands shaking. His face was a distorted red mask of rage. He was sweaty, his eyes wild. You're living in my house. He screamed, his voice muffled by the thick door. You're living high and mighty while your real family has nothing. You think you're better than us. He kicked the door. The wood groaned. You're a Washington, he roared. You're trash just like us. You're nothing. You're just a greedy little thief. I backed away, my phone in my hand. I dialed 911, my fingers fumbling. I whispered my address, my voice choked. I told them someone was trying to break in. He kept shouting his words, a stream of poison. He was calling me names I had not heard since I was 8 years old. He was telling me I was worthless, that I was ungrateful. By the time the police cruisers with their blue flashing lights pulled up the long curved driveway, he was gone. He had melted back into the night like the coward he was. The police were polite. "Are you sure you're safe here alone, ma'am?" I was not. But I nodded. I locked the door. I put on the security system. I did not sleep. The next morning I was exhausted, but I was determined. I had to go to work. I had to hold on to a piece of my real life. I work at a small nonprofit helping at-risk youth in the city. It is not glamorous, but it matters. It is the work I chose. I put on my work clothes, which felt like a costume in this grand house. I grabbed my keys and my bag. I walked out the front door into the bright, clear Atlanta morning. And I stopped. My car, a simple 10-year-old sedan, sat in the driveway. Or what was left of it. All 4 tires were flat. I walked closer, my stomach churning. They were not just flat. They were slashed. The rubber was gaping open in long, vicious cuts. My eyes traveled from the car up the walkway to the front door. I had been so scared I had not even looked at it when I left. On the beautiful, dark, cherrywood door my mother had loved so much, spray-painted in huge, dripping, angry red letters, was one word. Thief. They were not trying to win in court. They were trying to break me. They were trying to terrorize me until I gave up, until I ran, until I proved I was the scared little girl at the bus station they had abandoned. I stood there surrounded by the wreckage of their hate. I looked at the slashed tires. I looked at the paint dripping down my mother's door. I was not scared anymore. I was furious. They had underestimated Serafina, and they were making the exact same mistake with me. The legal notice was a declaration of war, but the next attack was not a legal one. It was strategic, it was public, and it was aimed at the one place my mother Serafina had held sacred. The First Ebenezer Baptist Church was more than a building. In the Black community of Atlanta, it was the center of social, political, and spiritual life. It was where reputations were made and destroyed. My mother had been a pillar of that church. She had funded its new roof. She had mentored its youth program. And I had grown up in its pews. It was in many ways the only other home I had ever known. That Sunday I went just as I had with her every Sunday. I went despite the lawsuit. I went despite the slashed tires. I went because I needed the comfort. I needed to feel her presence, to hear the choir she had loved, to be surrounded by the people who had known us both for my entire life. It was a mistake. The moment I walked in, I felt the shift. The air, usually so warm and welcoming, filled with hugs and "God bless you, baby," was cool. The whispers started instantly. People I had known for a decade, people who had been at the funeral just days before now, looked at me with a new expression. Confusion, suspicion, pity. I saw the church mothers, the powerful matriarchs in the front row, their spectacular Sunday hats like a row of colorful crowns. They were the moral compass of First Ebenezer. Mother Thompson, a woman who had slipped me peppermints since I was 10, saw me. She did not smile. She just watched. I felt like the red spray paint from my front door was on my face. Thief. I slipped into my usual pew. Serafina's pew near the front. The empty space beside me felt like a vast, cold ocean. Then I saw them. Jerome and Brenda. They were sitting in the back, but they were not hiding. Oh no, they were performing. Jerome was in a new dark suit. It was still cheap, but it was somber. Brenda, to my shock, was wearing a modest black dress, her face scrubbed clean of its usual heavy makeup. She held a handkerchief to her face, a picture of quiet, dignified grief. They looked respectable, and they were staring right at me. My stomach turned to acid. They were here for me. The service was a blur. The choir sang, "His eye is on the sparrow," my mother's favorite. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I could almost feel her beside me. But the peace was shattered by the feeling of hundreds of eyes on my back. The sermon was of all things on the fifth commandment. Honor thy father and thy mother. I felt my face burn. This was not a coincidence. Chloe's legal briefing in a motel room had a new chapter: psychological warfare. Finally, the sermon ended. The choir sang. The collection plates were passed. It was time for the final announcements and prayer requests. Does anyone in the congregation, the pastor boomed, have a testimony of God's grace or a burden to lay down for prayer? A hand went up in the back. A hand I recognized. Jerome. He stood up slowly. Brenda stood with him, clutching his arm, dabbing her eyes with the handkerchief. Pastor, Jerome said, his voice thick with a fake practiced humility. Pastor, brothers and sisters, my family, my wife Brenda and I, we are in desperate need of prayer. The church went quiet. This was the moment, the drama. As many of you know, Jerome continued, his voice cracking, we lost my dear sister-in-law, Serafina Johnson. A saint she was, a pillar of this community. May she rest in God's arms. Amen, the congregation murmured. Mother Thompson nodded, her eyes closed. But our grief, Jerome said, and he put his hand on his chest as if his heart was breaking. Our grief is twofold. He paused. He was a good performer. He knew how to work a crowd. You see, we also lost our daughter. Not in the way you think. He turned and looked, his eyes finding me in the pew. He pointed. That girl, our baby girl, Imani. Every single person in that church turned, every head, every eye. I was trapped in a spotlight of 1,000 judgmental stares. I could not breathe. We made mistakes, Jerome said, and now he had real tears welling up, tears of pure, unadulterated manipulation. We were young, we were foolish, we lost touch with our daughter, and we have spent 16 long, hard years, 16 years, praying that God would bring her back to us. Brenda let out a loud, convincing sob. Praise him, he did. And he did, Jerome echoed. We found her, but she's been led astray. The whispers started. Oh Lord, have mercy. We tried to see Serafina, Jerome said, his voice dropping to a heartbroken whisper. We tried to make peace. We drove to the hospital. We called. We just wanted to say goodbye. He was crying openly now, a father's broken heart on full display. But Imani, he choked on my name. She wouldn't let us in. She kept us from the deathbed. She told us we were no good. She told Serafina to turn against us. Her own blood, her sister. A collective gasp went through the church. That was the kill shot. In this community, keeping a family from a deathbed was a sin lower than murder. It was an act of profound, unforgivable cruelty. I just stared, my mouth dry. I was frozen. The truth flashed in my mind. Serafina pale and weak, but her eyes as sharp as steel after the nurse said Jerome was in the lobby. Imani, she had hissed, grabbing my hand. You call security. I will not have that leech in my room. I will not have his poison, his fake sympathy, while I am trying to die in peace. Get him out! I had done it. I had protected her. And now that act of protection, that final act of love, was being twisted into a weapon to destroy me. And now, Jerome finished, his voice full of righteous sorrow, now Serafina is gone, and our daughter has inherited everything, millions, the house, and she has thrown her own mother and father out on the street. She won't even speak to us. She says we are not her family. The performance was complete. He had painted me as a cold, heartless, greedy monster who had stolen a dying woman's money and spit on the very concept of family. "Please, church," he begged, "pray for her heart. Pray that all this money doesn't take her soul. Pray that she remembers the commandment, honor thy father and mother." The room was silent. Even the pastor seemed stunned. He cleared his throat. We will certainly keep the entire Washington family in our prayers." The service was dismissed. The organist started to play, but I could not hear it. I was paralyzed. It was not until people started to file out that I realized the true extent of the damage. The aisle around my pew was empty. People who had known me, hugged me, and fed me for 20 years. They walked past. They averted their eyes. They clutched their Bibles, moving to the other side, as if my sin was contagious. Mother Thompson. The woman who used to give me peppermints stood up. She looked right at me. Her face was not angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. She shook her head, a slow, deep, mournful gesture. "Shame," she muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "A child who doesn't honor her parents. Shame before God." I stood up, my legs shaking. I walked out of that church alone. As I reached the grand front steps, I saw them. Jerome and Brenda. They were not crying anymore. They were surrounded. The pastor was patting Jerome's shoulder. Mother Thompson was hugging Brenda, offering her a casserole, telling her she was welcome at the women's auxiliary meeting. They were being comforted. They were being welcomed. They had successfully painted themselves as the victims. And I, the grieving daughter, the rightful heir. I was the outcast. They had not just filed a lawsuit. They had taken my home. They had taken my car. And now, with one single brilliant performance, they had taken my entire community. The courthouse hearing room was small, suffocating, and smelled like stale coffee and old floor wax. This was not a grand courtroom. It was where the messy, unglamorous work of the law happened. I sat beside Mrs. Hayes, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were white. "The judge will likely dismiss their petition, Imani," Mrs. Hayes had whispered to me in the hallway. "We have the adoption decree. They have no standing. This is a frivolous nuisance. Judges hate frivolous nuisances." I tried to believe her, but the moment I saw their lawyer, my stomach dropped. He was not from a big shiny office in Buckhead. His name was Slocum. He was a small, sweaty man in a wrinkled suit that pulled too tight. He had the hungry, reptilian eyes of a man who advertises on bus benches. He was exactly the kind of lawyer who would know every dirty trick because he had no other kind. He was perfect for them. Jerome, Brenda, Marcus, and Chloe were all there, sitting on the opposite side. They looked like a strange, toxic collection of defeated ambitions. Chloe in her sharp suit looked completely out of place, like a hawk forced to sit with pigeons. But she was the one whispering, handing Slocum notes. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Alston, looked like she had zero patience for any of us. "Mr. Slocum," she said, her voice flat, "you petitioned for this emergency hearing. You are claiming the will of Serafina Johnson is invalid. This court has been presented with a final sealed decree of adoption. Your clients, Mr. and Mrs. Washington, have no legal standing, so I will ask you once, why are we here?" Slocum jumped up, a thin, oily smile on his face. "Your Honor, thank you. Standing is indeed a complex issue, but we are here today to discuss something far more urgent. We are here to prove that Ms. Serafina Johnson, in her final months, was the victim of a sophisticated predatory campaign of undue influence." He said the words like they were a magic incantation. He said "defendant" when he referred to me like I was already a criminal. "We are here," Slocum continued, "to protect Ms. Johnson's true wishes from the person who manipulated her. And we have proof." Mrs. Hayes started to stand. "Your Honor, this is speculation?" "Proof, Mr. Slocum?" the judge asked, ignoring Mrs. Hayes. "Yes, Your Honor. First, I submit emails from Ms. Johnson's personal account sent to my client, her brother, Mr. Marcus Johnson. He handed copies to the judge and to Mrs. Hayes. I leaned over to read ours. My blood ran cold. They were emails supposedly from Serafina's account, but they were wrong. The language was simple, childlike, and terrified. Dear brother, I am not well. The girl is watching me. She took my checkbook. I am scared. Another one read, Marcus, please come. I do not know what day it is. She will not let me call you. Those are fake, I whispered, horrified. She never called me the girl. Her writing, this is not her. She would never. Chloe. Mrs. Hayes whispered back, her face grim. She knew and I knew, but Slocum was performing for the judge. As you can see, Your Honor, Slocum said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. This is a woman in deep cognitive distress. A woman terrified of her caretaker. Objection, Mrs. Hayes said, her voice sharp. Lack of foundation, hearsay. There is zero proof Ms. Johnson actually wrote these. They are not authenticated. Noted, the judge said, but she was still reading. And she was frowning. It is a low bar for a preliminary hearing, Mrs. Hayes. I will allow it for now. Proceed, Mr. Slocum. A crack. The first crack in our armor. Thank you, Your Honor. I call Mr. Marcus Johnson to the stand. My Uncle Marcus shuffled up. He looked even more pathetic than usual, his eyes wide and scared. He put his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. My stomach churned. He was being fed lines by Chloe. Mr. Johnson, Slocum began, you were close to your sister Serafina. Oh, yes, Marcus said, his voice cracking. Very close. I loved her very much. And in her final months, did you try to visit her? Every day. Marcus lied and his eyes filled with tears. He was a better actor than I thought. Every single day. But she wouldn't let me in. He pointed a shaking finger at me. I gasped. That is a lie. Silence, the judge snapped. One more outburst, Ms. Washington, and you will be held in contempt. Do you understand me? I shrank back, my face burning. I felt like a child. What do you mean? Slocum continued. She wouldn't let you in. I would ring the bell, Marcus sniffled. And she would answer on the intercom. She would say, Serafina is sleeping. Or, Serafina doesn't want to see you. I just wanted to see my sister. I told her, I'm family. And I heard her. He choked on a sob. Heard what, Mr. Johnson? I heard Imani laugh. She said. He took a shaky breath. She said, this is my house now. It's all mine. Get off the property before I call the police. The room was silent. It was a perfect, devastating lie. It painted me exactly as Chloe had planned, the greedy gatekeeper. And Mr. Johnson, Slocum pressed, did you ever hear your sister inside? Yes, Marcus whispered, and now he was full on crying. I heard her. She called my name once. Marcus. Is that you, Marcus? And then the window slammed. She was a prisoner in her own home, and I couldn't help her. Liar, I hissed, too quiet for the judge to hear, but loud enough for Mrs. Hayes. She put a restraining hand on my arm. Her knuckles were white. We were losing. The truth did not matter. The performance did. No further questions, Slocum said, looking like he'd just won an Oscar. Your Honor, he continued as Marcus shuffled off the stand. The family's testimony is powerful, but I understand the court may see it as biased. That is why I have one more witness, a neutral third-party caregiver. I call Nurse Lisa Whitehall to the stand. My blood turned to water. Lisa Whitehall. She was an agency nurse who had worked a few night shifts, maybe 4 or 5, when Serafina first came home from the hospital. I remembered her. She had been kind. She had been sweet. A woman in crisp blue scrubs walked up. She looked professional. She looked competent. She looked credible. Nurse Whitehall, Slocum began. You were retained to care for Seraphina Johnson in her final weeks. Yes, sir. For about 3 weeks. She said, her voice calm and clear. And in that time, what did you observe about the patient, Ms. Johnson? The nurse looked at the judge with an expression of deep professional concern. She was confused, very disoriented, especially in the evenings. She would often mistake me for her sister. She had trouble remembering things. What she ate, what day it was. And what did you observe about Ms. Washington's behavior? The nurse hesitated as if she was reluctant to speak. A perfect piece of theater. I was concerned. Ms. Washington, Imani. She controlled all the medication. Judge Alston looked up from her notes. What do you mean, nurse? Ms. Washington kept all the pain medication, even the prescribed narcotics, locked in her personal safe in her bedroom. She said she would dispense them herself. She controlled the schedule. She controlled the dosage. That's because I was following the doctor's orders, I whispered frantically to Mrs. Hayes. The doctor told me to prevent addiction. But the nurse was continuing, her voice full of sorrow. Sometimes when Ms. Johnson was in pain, clearly agitated, Ms. Washington would withhold the medicine. She'd say, "Not now, Mama. We have to finish these papers first." No. The word tore out of my throat. The judge's gavel cracked. Ms. Washington, I will have you removed. What papers? Slocum asked. Stacks of them, the nurse said, shaking her head. Bank documents, legal-looking papers. She would put them in front of Ms. Johnson, who was clearly too tired to read. She would just say, "Is this right, baby?" And Ms. Washington would say, "Yes, Mama, just sign here." And she would take Ms. Johnson's hand and guide it. This was it. This was the knife. It was a lie. A complete, devastating, brilliant lie. Seraphina read every line of every document. She was sharper than her lawyers even on her worst day. But this nurse, this stranger, was describing a monster. I eventually filed a report with my agency. The nurse finished, her voice low. I had to. I believed I was witnessing financial and medical abuse. I was going to be sick. Mrs. Hayes stood up, her voice trembling with a rage I had never heard. Your Honor, this is an outrageous fabrication, a complete distortion. You will have your chance to refute this at trial. Mrs. Hayes, Judge Alston said, her voice like steel. She was no longer impatient. She was angry, and all her anger was directed at me. Slocum stood for his closing. Your Honor, we have shown a pattern of isolation. We have shown cognitive decline. We have shown direct manipulation of legal documents. And we have shown a horrifying level of medical and financial control. This is not just about a will. This is about an active crime. The defendant, Ms. Washington, right now has sole control of a $4 million liquid estate. We believe she is a flight risk. We believe she will dissipate the assets. We are petitioning for an immediate temporary emergency freeze on all assets of the estate. A freeze? I whispered the word hollow. Your Honor, you cannot. Mrs. Hayes was on her feet. That is her money, left to her by her mother. This is a preemptive strike to bankrupt her, to stop her from defending herself. Mrs. Hayes, the judge said, holding up a hand. And I saw it. The decision was made. The nurse's testimony was too much. The smoke was too thick. The testimony from Nurse Whitehall is deeply, deeply troubling, the judge said, her eyes boring into me. I felt like scum. I felt like the person she was describing. While these claims are yet to be proven at a full trial, this court cannot in good conscience allow the defendant to maintain control of these assets, while such serious allegations are pending. No, I breathed. Please, please, no. It is the order of this court, Judge Alston said, that the assets of the estate of Seraphina Johnson be temporarily frozen pending a full evidentiary hearing. All accounts, all properties, effective immediately. She hit the gavel. The sound was like a gunshot in the tiny room. Frozen. All of it. The $4 million. The house. I could not access anything. I could not pay Mrs. Hayes. I could not pay the light bill. Slocum packed his briefcase, a smug, tiny smile on his face. Chloe was whispering to Marcus, who looked like he was going to throw up. I just sat there, my body numb. I could not feel my hands. I could not feel my feet. We stood to leave, my legs like cement. As we walked out into the cold marble hallway, they were there. Jerome and Brenda. They had been waiting. They had not been allowed in the hearing, but they had waited outside for the verdict. Brenda saw my face. She saw the absolute crushing white-faced shock. She saw the defeat. Her face split into a wide, triumphant grin. She started to laugh, a high, ugly, cackling laugh that echoed in the hallway. "What's wrong, daughter?" She sneered, her voice dripping with fake, sugary sympathy. "You look like you just lost $4 million. Jerome just stood there, his arms crossed, smiling. "Enjoy that $2 million house, girl," he said, his voice low and vicious. "I hope you like it. Because you can't pay the power bill. You can't even afford to buy groceries." He leaned in, his voice a whisper, his breath hot and sour. "Welcome back to the bottom, Imani. Back where you belong." The judge's gavel. That single sharp crack of wood on wood was the sound of my life ending, frozen. The word echoed in my head. I walked out of that courthouse in a daze. I did not even register Mrs. Hayes talking to me. I took an Uber back to the house, my house, the $2 million prison. The first day was just quiet. I was numb. I just sat in the massive living room staring at a painting of a black woman, proud and regal, on the wall. My mother's painting. I felt like I was failing her. The second day, the freeze became real. I went to the grocery store. I had pushed a cart around, filling it with basics: bread, eggs, coffee. I got to the register. I swiped the debit card linked to the estate. Declined. My face burned. The cashier, a young girl, just looked bored. "Insufficient funds," she said loud enough for the man behind me to hear. I fumbled in my purse. I had my personal card, the one from my job. I swiped it. Declined. I stared at the machine. What I knew, I had money in that account. A few $1,000s. I tried again. Declined. I had to abandon the cart. I walked out of the store, my face on fire. I got home and immediately checked my personal bank account online. The balance was zero. I did not understand. I called my bank. "Ma'am," the automated voice said. "No, I needed a person." I finally got a man on the phone. "Yes, Ms. Washington. It looks like there was a garnishment, a lien, no, judicial hold." Slocum. Chloe. They had not just frozen the estate. They had found a way to link me to it, to freeze my personal, private, earned money. They had argued I might have been hiding estate assets in my own account. I looked in my wallet. I had $37.14 in cash. I was standing in a $2 million house with $4 million that was supposedly mine, and I had $37. Jerome's voice echoed in my head. "Welcome back to the bottom, girl." I started to panic. I was rationing food. I turned the air conditioning off to save power, hoping the bill was not already overdue. The house grew hot, sticky, and silent. Then on the third day, the final pillar fell. My phone rang. It was Sarah, my boss at the nonprofit. The last piece of my old life, the one I had built. "Imani," she said. Her voice was strained. "Hi, how are you?" Holding up. I'm surviving, Sarah. It's been a lot." "Yes," she said. She was hemming and hawing. "Listen, Imani. I'm calling for a difficult reason. The board of directors held an emergency meeting this morning." My blood went cold. "A meeting about what?" "About you, Imani. About this situation." "My situation, Sarah. This is a private family matter. It has nothing to do with my work." "It does when it's public," she said, and her voice lost its sympathy, replaced by a cold corporate tone. The lawsuit, the allegations, I mean, undue influence, medical abuse. That is serious, Imani. And, frankly, the incident at First Ebenezer, it's all over the community. Our donors are concerned. We work with at-risk youth. We cannot be seen as compromised. It's about the mission. What are you saying? I whispered, my hand gripping the phone. I am so sorry, Imani. But the board has voted. We have to ask you to take an indefinite and unpaid leave of absence, effective immediately. Click. She hung up. Suspended. No. Fired. Fired because my own family had painted me as a monster. That was it. That was the bottom. They had won. They had taken my community. They had taken my money. And now they had taken my job. My identity. I was alone. Completely and totally alone. I had $37, no job, and a house I could not afford to put gas in, let alone pay the taxes on. I collapsed onto the cold marble floor of the foyer, my whole body shaking. I cried. I cried for my mother. I cried for myself. I cried for that 8-year-old girl at the bus station who was once again completely abandoned. After an hour, I had no tears left. I had only one call to make. I dialed Mrs. Hayes. My voice was a dead, empty whisper. Mrs. Hayes, I said. It's Imani. It's over. What are you talking about? Her voice was sharp. They won, I whispered. They won. I just got suspended from my job. My personal accounts are frozen. I have no money. I cannot pay you. I cannot fight this anymore. I took a shaky breath. I'm going to settle. I'll give them what they want. I'll give them the house. I'll give them the money. I don't care. I just want this to be over. They can have it. They've won. There was a long, cold silence on the line. I thought she was angry. I thought she was disappointed. When she finally spoke, her voice was not the voice of a lawyer. It was the voice of a 5-star general. Imani, she said, her voice like steel. I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very hard. Who in the hell do you think Serafina Johnson was? I was silent. What? Did you think she was a fool? Mrs. Hayes's voice rose, filled with a sudden hot anger. Did you think that woman who built a real estate empire from nothing, who fought off racist contractors, sexist bankers, and greedy politicians for 40 years, was going to be taken down by a cheap motel lawyer, her idiot brother, and a pair of grifters from a bus station? But the assets are frozen. First, she snapped, cutting me off. You stop worrying about my fee. Right now. Your mother, Serafina, she paid my retainer in full 1 year in advance from a separate private trust that is not part of the estate. I work for her, Imani, and by extension, I work for you. This is just getting started. I was stunned. I didn't know. Of course you did not, Mrs. Hayes said, her voice softening just a fraction. It was insurance. Which brings me to my second point. They want to play dirty. They want to bring fake witnesses. They want to talk about evidence your mother knew this was coming. She knew exactly what they were. A pause. She left you one last thing, Imani. She left it with me for this exact scenario. She called it her insurance package. My heart, which I thought had stopped, gave a single hard thump. What? What is it? It is a black metal fireproof box, Mrs. Hayes said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. And it is going to end this. Now I suggest you stop crying. Pull yourself together, find $37 worth of taxi fare, and get to my office. We have work to do. That taxi ride to Mrs. Hayes's office was the longest ride of my life. It cost $28. I handed the driver a 20, a 5, and 3 crumpled ones. I kept the change. $37 had become 9. I was officially a statistic. A broke, unemployed woman in a city that did not care. When I walked into her office, I must have looked like a ghost. But Mrs. Hayes was not a woman who dealt in pity. She was a woman who dealt in facts. Imani, she said, not even a hello. She pointed to the large polished conference table. Sit. She did not say anything else. She walked to a large steel filing cabinet in the corner of her office. She spun a combination lock. The cabinet clicked open. She pulled out a black metal fireproof box. It looked like something that would hold government secrets. It was heavy. She placed it on the table between us with a solid, definitive thud. Your mother, Serafina, she began, left this with me. It was deposited into my firm's vault the day she was admitted to the hospital. Her instructions were precise. This box was not to be opened unless, and I quote, the jackals show up. Well, Imani, the jackals are at the door. My heart was hammering. A box. She produced a small silver key from her desk drawer. She unlocked the box. I was expecting stacks of papers, maybe cash, maybe jewelry. It was almost empty. Inside, resting on a black velvet lining, was a single silver USB flash drive. I looked at it confused. That's it. That's the insurance. Mrs. Hayes's thin lips curved into a smile. It was a terrifying smile. That, she said, is a tactical nuclear weapon. She took the drive. She walked to the far end of the conference room where a massive flat-screen television was mounted on the wall. She plugged the USB drive into a port on her laptop and mirrored her screen to the TV. Your mother was a brilliant, brilliant woman, Mrs. Hayes said her back to me as she clicked through files. She was a fighter, and she knew she was surrounded by vultures. So when she went into the hospital, she had a security system installed in her room. She turned to look at me, her eyes glinting. She called it a nanny cam. She told the staff it was so she could make sure no one stole her things. It was for security, just not the kind they thought. She recorded everything. My mouth went dry. Now, Mrs. Hayes said, let's review the testimony from that hearing, shall we? Exhibit A. The loving, concerned brother Marcus, who was pushed away by his greedy niece. She clicked a file. The screen flickered, and suddenly I was looking at my mother's hospital room. The angle was high from the corner. Serafina was in the bed. She looked pale, yes, but her eyes were closed. She looked like she was sleeping. The door to the room creaked open. Marcus, my uncle, slithered in. He looked around, saw Serafina was asleep, and then… He did not leave. He crept over to the bedside table. He picked up a stack of papers, her personal papers. Then he went to her bed. He gently, no slyly, shook her shoulder. Serafina, he whispered. Sarah, wake up. Her eyes snapped open, and they were not confused. They were furious. Marcus, what in the hell are you doing in my room? Who let you in? Her voice was weak but sharp. Sarah, I was just checking on you. He stammered, his voice slick. Listen, I brought some papers. Just some things to, help manage your accounts while you're unwell. Let me take some of this pressure off you. He fanned the papers out on her hospital tray. If you just sign here. My mother, Serafina, looked at the papers, then she looked at him. She used the remote to raise her bed to a sitting position. Get your hands off my tray, she hissed. Get out. Serafina, be reasonable, he pleaded. I'm just trying to help Imani. Has you all confused? You're not… Me, she snapped. You help, like you helped me out of $50,000 5 years ago. You think I'm stupid. You think because I'm sick, I'm senile. Get out of my room. She reached for the nurse's call button. Get out, or I will have the nurse call security and tell them my deadbeat thieving brother is trespassing in my room. Marcus grabbed the papers, his face bright red, and scrambled out of the room. The video ended. I was speechless. My hand was over my mouth. He lied. He said, he said I pushed him out. He said he heard me laugh. He lied, Mrs. Hayes said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. And we have the tape, one down. She clicked to the next file. Now, for the main event. Nurse Lisa Whitehall, the unbiased third party who was so concerned about your medical abuse, the woman who saw you control the medication. A new video, a different day. The nurse Lisa was standing by my mother's bed. She looked nervous. "Ma'am," the nurse said, her voice low. "Mrs. Johnson, I just need to tell you something. That man, Mr. Washington, he says he's Imani's father. He's in the lobby. He offered me $1,000. Cash." My blood went cold. $1,000. Serafina's voice was quiet. "Yes, ma'am," the nurse whispered. Just to let him in the room. Alone with you. For 5 minutes. When the girl's not here. I told him I couldn't, of course, but..." My mother looked at her, a long, hard, analytical stare. She smiled. A thin, cold, terrifying smile. $1,000, you say? Yes, ma'am. Nurse Whitehall, Serafina said, you did the right thing by telling me. Now here is what you are going to do. You are going to go back down to that lobby. You are going to tell Mr. Washington that you have a deal. You are going to take his $1,000. You are going to put it in your pocket. And then you are going to pick up that hospital phone right there, and you are going to call security, and you will tell them a man just tried to bribe you to gain access to a patient. Then you will come back here, and you will give me the $1,000. And then you will pack your things because you are fired for even considering it for a second. Do you understand me? The nurse's face went white. But I told you. You told me, Serafina said, her voice like ice. Because you were scared you'd get caught, not because you were honest. Now get out and do exactly as I said. The video cut. I was shaking. Oh my God, she knew he was there. She knew he was trying to... She knew, Mrs. Hayes said. That nurse didn't file a report with her agency because she was concerned. She filed a complaint because she was fired, and Jerome, that idiot, he paid for the very evidence that will destroy his own case. 2 down. I was breathing again. I was really breathing. This is amazing, I said, my voice choked with relief. This destroys their testimony. We win. No, Mrs. Hayes said, and my hope vanished. Not yet. This is just character assassination. It's good. It proves they lied under oath. But Chloe is smart. She'll pivot. She'll say, fine, they are liars, but that doesn't change the core argument. That Serafina was confused. That she lacked testamentary capacity. That's their entire case. That is what Judge Alston believed. It's our word against a nurse's testimony. My hope faded. So, what do we do? She said Serafina was confused. Yes, Mrs. Hayes said. She did. She looked at the USB drive and that terrifying smile returned. And now, for my favorite part. She clicked the final file. The file name was Emery Evil Final. The timestamp on the video was 2 days before Serafina signed the will. The image was completely different. It was not a grainy, high-angle nanny cam. This was a professional, high-definition video. The setting was not the hospital. It was my mother's beautiful sunlit study in the house. Serafina was sitting in her favorite leather chair. She looked frail, yes. She was wearing a beautiful silk robe, but her eyes were like diamonds. A man was sitting opposite her. He was in a sharp suit with a kind, intelligent face. Please state your name and credentials for the record, doctor, Serafina said, her voice clear and strong. The man nodded, looking into the camera. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne. I am the Chief of Geriatric Psychiatry at Emory University Hospital. I am board certified in both neurology and forensic psychology. I am here today on this date at the request of my patient, Ms. Serafina Johnson, to conduct a full recorded evaluation of her cognitive state and testamentary capacity. My hand flew to my mouth. I could not speak. Your mother, Mrs. Hayes whispered, knew exactly what Chloe's legal argument would be. So she hired the top expert in the state 2 days before she signed the will to prove her sanity, on camera. On the screen, the doctor was asking questions. Ms. Johnson, Dr. Thorne said, can you tell me the full names of your immediate living biological relatives? Serafina. I have one brother, Marcus Johnson, and one sister, Brenda Washington, formerly Johnson. Dr. Thorne. And your legal family? Serafina. I have one daughter, Imani Washington, whom I legally adopted 14 years ago after her biological parents, the aforementioned Brenda, and her husband Jerome abandoned her at a bus station. Dr. Thorne. Can you list your major assets? Serafina, without blinking, listed them. The Buckhead House, the 3 rental properties in Decatur, the small commercial building in Midtown, the exact current-day balance of her main investment portfolio, to the dollar. Dr. Thorne. And what is the purpose of the legal document, the will that you informed me you plan to sign in 2 days? Serafina leaned forward. She looked right into the camera as if she was looking past it, past the doctor, past the months, right at me, and right at the people who were trying to destroy me. The purpose of my will, she said, her voice ringing with absolute unshakable clarity, is to ensure that 100% of my life's work, my entire estate, goes to the only person who has ever earned it. The only person I love, my daughter Imani. And to simultaneously ensure that my greedy, useless, deadbeat brother, my pathetic, weak, and equally greedy sister, and the 2 human parasites who abandoned my daughter, do not receive 1 single cent. Is that clear enough for you? Doctor Thorne smiled. He closed his notebook. Ms. Johnson, he said, after a 2-hour examination, it is my non-negotiable professional opinion that you are not only of sound mind, you are in fact one of the sharpest and most lucid minds I have had the pleasure of interviewing this year. You possess full and frankly exceptional testamentary capacity. The video went black. I just sat there in the dark conference room. I was crying. But these were not the tears of a victim. They were tears of awe, tears of love. She knew, I whispered. She knew everything. Mrs. Hayes stood up, ejecting the flash drive. She dropped it into her pocket. They wanted to challenge her mind, she said, her voice low. They had no idea what level of war they were walking into. She was a General Imani, and she just handed us the entire battle plan. She grabbed her briefcase. Now, I am going to file an emergency motion to dissolve the freeze, introduce new evidence, and demand an immediate hearing. And then we are going to schedule the most satisfying public execution the Fulton County court system has ever seen. The main courtroom of the Fulton County Superior Court was nothing like the small, suffocating hearing room. This was the real thing. It was old, paneled in dark, rich wood that reached up to a soaring, ornate ceiling. It felt less like a courtroom and more like a cathedral. A cathedral built for judgment. And it was full. Every single bench was packed. They had come for the show. I saw them all. Mother Thompson from the church, her face a mask of stern, self-righteous judgment. The pastor looking deeply uncomfortable. I even saw Sarah, my old boss from the nonprofit, sitting in the back, her arms crossed. They were all here to watch the final act of my downfall, to see the monster from the church performance be officially condemned. At the front, Slocum, their lawyer, was practically vibrating with confidence. He shuffled his papers, whispering to Chloe, who looked cool and detached. Jerome and Brenda sat right behind them. They were dressed for the part of grieving family, both in dark, somber clothes. but they could not hide the greedy, excited light in their eyes. I sat next to Mrs. Hayes, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. "Just breathe," she had told me, "and watch the show." Judge Alston entered. The room stood. She sat, her face as stern and impartial as stone. "Mr. Slocum," she said, "you may call your first witness." "Thank you, Your Honor," Slocum said, standing. "The plaintiffs call Ms. Lisa Whitehall." The nurse, the one from the hearing, walked up. She was in her crisp blue scrubs again, a picture of medical professionalism and concern. She swore on the Bible, her hand steady. Slocum led her through the same lies. "Nurse Whitehall, please tell the court what you observed during your time caring for Ms. Seraphina Johnson." The nurse turned to the judge, her face a mask of practiced sincerity. "I was very concerned, Your Honor. Ms. Johnson was often confused, disoriented, and Ms. Washington," she pointed at me, "she was very controlling." The audience murmured. Mother Thompson nodded as if her suspicions were confirmed. "How so controlling?" Slocum prompted. "The medication," the nurse said, shaking her head sadly. "She kept all the pain medication, even the narcotics prescribed by the doctor, locked in her personal safe. She said she would dispense them herself. And sometimes she would withhold them." "She would what?" Slocum asked, feigning shock. "She would withhold them," the nurse repeated. "And the papers. Oh, the papers. She was always making Ms. Johnson sign things. Bank papers, legal papers." Ms. Johnson was clearly exhausted. She did not understand what she was signing. I saw Ms. Washington take her hand and guide it to the signature line. It was medical and financial abuse. That is why I filed a report with my agency. Slocum looked at the judge. "Thank you, nurse. A true profile in courage." He sat down, looking disgustingly proud of himself. Judge Alston looked at me, her face cold. "Mrs. Hayes, your witness." Mrs. Hayes stood up. She walked to the podium, not with a stack of notes, but with a single sheet of paper. "Nurse Whitehall," she began, her voice calm, "thank you for that vivid testimony." She looked at the paper. "You testified under oath that you were deeply concerned about Ms. Johnson's welfare, that you observed abuse." "Yes," the nurse said, her voice full of false sincerity. "I had to speak up. It was my duty." "You are under oath, Nurse Whitehall," Mrs. Hayes said, her voice suddenly sharp and cold. "You are aware that perjury, lying under oath in a court of law, is a felony in the state of Georgia." The nurse's confidence faltered just a fraction. "Yes, I know that." Slocum at his table sat up a little straighter. "You testified that you were concerned about outside influences, but you left one out, didn't you? Tell me, nurse, are you familiar with Mr. Jerome Washington?" The nurse's eyes darted, just for a second, toward Jerome. "No, I never saw him." "You never saw him," Mrs. Hayes repeated. "Interesting. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce new evidence previously submitted to the court. We will call it Exhibit B." The large monitors in the courtroom, dark until now, flickered to life. The entire room, including the judge, turned to look. The grainy, high-angle nanny cam footage appeared. The date and timestamp were clear in the corner. I saw my mother's bed. I saw Nurse Lisa Whitehall. And I heard her voice, tinny and clear, fill the courtroom. That man, Mr. Washington, he says he's Imani's father. He's in the lobby. He offered me $1,000, cash." A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. Mother Thompson's hand flew to her mouth. Jerome had frozen, his face a mask of panic. $1,000. My mother's voice, weak but sharp, came from the speakers. The nurse on the screen nodded. Just to let him in the room, alone with you." On the witness stand, the real Nurse Whitehall was gray. Her hands were gripping the rail. That is out of context." "Is it?" Mrs. Hayes asked. Let's continue. The whole courtroom then heard my mother Serafina give her instructions. You are going to go back down. You are going to take his $1,000. And then you will pack your things because you are fired. The video went black. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Mrs. Hayes walked slowly toward the witness stand like a lioness approaching her prey. So Nurse Whitehall, her voice was low and deadly. Let's try this again, shall we? Did you file a report because you were concerned, or did you file it because you were fired for attempting to solicit a bribe from Mr. Washington? The nurse was shaking. She looked at Slocum, her eyes wide with panic. She looked at Jerome. I cannot. You are twisting. Answer the question, nurse. Judge Alston commanded, her voice like thunder. I plead the fifth, the nurse shrieked. You do not get to plead the fifth on testimony you have already given, Judge Alston snapped. She was furious. She looked at the bailiff. Bailiff, take Ms. Whitehall into custody. She is remanded on charges of perjury, immediately. No, the nurse shrieked as the bailiff grabbed her arm. Please, they made me do it. They paid me. Slocum, Get her out of here, the judge ordered. The nurse was dragged out sobbing hysterically, one down. Jerome and Brenda were white as ghosts. Slocum was sweating profusely, his smugness completely gone. Mr. Slocum, the judge said, her voice shaking with rage. You had better have something else, or I will hold you in contempt. Slocum rattled, stood up, fumbling with his papers. Yes, Your Honor. The nurse was clearly unstable, but the core of our case, the isolation. The family I call Mr. Marcus Johnson to the stand. My Uncle Marcus looked like he was walking to his own execution. He looked green. He got to the stand, his hand trembling so hard he could barely put it on the Bible. Mr. Johnson, Slocum said, trying to regain control. Tell the court, did you try to see your dying sister? Marcus nodded, his eyes darting to me. Yes, he whispered. Every day. I loved her. And what happened? She stopped me. He pointed at me. Imani. She would not let me in. She pushed me away. She laughed at me. She said, it's my house now. Get off the property. I just wanted to say goodbye. He was crying. Real pathetic crocodile tears. And did you hear your sister? Slocum prompted. Yes, Marcus choked out. I heard her. She was crying. She called my name. She said, Marcus, is that you, Marcus? And then the door slammed. She was a prisoner in her own home. Mrs. Hayes stood up. She did not even wait for Slocum to sit down. Mr. Johnson, she said, her voice sharp. That was a very moving performance. You were pushed. Yes, he insisted. You heard your sister crying for you. Yes, she loved me. I see. Mrs. Hayes turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to play Exhibit A. The monitors flickered on again. The same grainy, high-angle footage. The dark hospital room. The door creeps open, and Marcus slithers in. The entire courtroom watched in dead silence as Marcus crept to the bed, as he shook Serafina awake, as he fanned the papers out on her tray. And then the audio. Marcus, what in the hell are you doing in my room? The voice was not crying. It was furious. The audience watched him plead. Sarah, I brought some papers. Just sign here. And then the glorious, righteous, and utterly powerful voice of my mother, echoing through the cathedral of justice. Get your hands off my tray. Get out. The video continued. The entire courtroom heard her call him a deadbeat. The entire courtroom heard her call him a thief. The entire courtroom heard her threaten to call security. The video ended. Marcus was frozen on the stand. His face was a mask of pure abject horror. He was not just a liar. He was a thief. I glanced at Chloe. Her sharp white face was perfectly, utterly still. She was staring at her husband. Then very slowly, very deliberately, she closed her laptop. She clicked the latch on her briefcase. She did not look angry. She looked done. Mrs. Hayes walked slowly toward the witness stand. Her heels clicked loudly in the silent room. "Mr. Johnson," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, Was that you being pushed away? Or was that you trying to get a sick woman to sign legal documents?" Marcus opened his mouth. No sound came out. "Was she crying for you, Mr. Johnson?" Mrs. Hayes's voice was a whip. "Or was she calling you a thief? He just crumpled." He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking in complete silent humiliation. "No further questions, Your Honor," Mrs. Hayes said, turning her back on him in disgust. Slocum was sputtering, his face was slick with sweat. He looked like a cornered rat, his smug confidence from the hearing completely gone. "Your Honor," he pleaded, shuffling his papers. "Your Honor, the witnesses, they were clearly compromised, corrupted. But that does not change the core issue. The central fact that Ms. Serafina Johnson was a confused, sick old woman. Her mind was not sound. We have the emails, we have proof she was being manipulated." Judge Alston stared at him, her face a mask of cold fury. "Proof? Mr. Slocum, the only proof I have seen today is that your clients are perjurers and your witnesses are felons. Do you have anything else before I hold you in contempt?" Slocum's desperation was palpable. "Yes, the capacity, the mental state. That is the entire case. She was Mr. Slocum." Mrs. Hayes's voice cut through his panic like a surgeon's scalpel. It was not loud, it was final. "Are you finished?" She did not wait for an answer. She turned to Judge Alston. "Your Honor, the defense would like to address Mr. Slocum's core issue of mental capacity directly. We would like to play our final piece of evidence, Exhibit C." The monitors in the courtroom, which had gone dark, flickered to life again. But this was not the grainy, high-angle nanny cam footage. This was high definition, crystal clear, professionally filmed and lit. The setting was not a hospital room. It was my mother's beautiful sunlit study in the house. Serafina was sitting in her favorite high-backed leather chair. She was wearing a beautiful silk robe. She looked frail, yes, but her posture was perfect. And her eyes were not confused. They were like fire. A man in a sharp suit and a kind, intelligent face sat opposite her. "Please state your name and credentials for the record, doctor." Serafina's voice, clear and strong, commanded. The man nodded, looking directly into the camera. "My name is Dr. Elias Thorne. I am the Chief of Geriatric Psychiatry at Emory University Hospital. I am board certified in both neurology and forensic psychology. I am here today at the request of my patient, Ms. Serafina Johnson, to conduct a full recorded evaluation of her cognitive state and testamentary capacity." A low, stunned murmur swept through the courtroom. Mother Thompson's mouth fell open. Slocum. Slocum looked like he was going to be physically ill. This was not just a doctor. This was the doctor. On the screen, Dr. Thorne was gentle but clinical. "Ms. Johnson, can you tell me today's full date?" She recited it. "Can you tell me the name of the President of the United States?" She recited it. "Ms. Johnson, can you list your major assets for me?" And my mother Serafina, without blinking, began to list them. The primary residence in Buckhead assessed at $2.1 million, 3 rental properties in Decatur, a small commercial building in Midtown, an investment portfolio with Morgan Stanley with a current balance of, and she stated the exact current-day balance of her main investment portfolio. To the dollar. A gasp went through the room. "And your family?" Dr. Thorne asked. "Your legal relatives." "I have one brother, Marcus Johnson," she said, her voice clear. One biological sister, Brenda Washington, formerly Johnson, and I have one daughter, Imani Washington, whom I legally adopted 14 years ago after her biological parents, the aforementioned Brenda, and her husband Jerome abandoned her at a bus station in exchange for $5,000. The camera was on her, but her words were for them. In the courtroom, Jerome let out a choked, gagging sound. Dr. Thorne finished his questions. He closed his notebook. Ms. Johnson, after a 2-hour examination, it is my non-negotiable professional opinion that you are not only of sound mind, you are in fact one of the sharpest and most lucid minds I have had the pleasure of interviewing this year. You possess full and frankly exceptional testamentary capacity. The video was not over. Serafina in her chair leaned forward. She looked past the doctor. She looked directly into the camera lens. It was like she was staring through time through the screen, right at the people who had gathered to rob her. "And one more thing," she said, her voice suddenly like steel. "This part is for Jerome and Brenda Washington." In the courtroom, Brenda let out a small, terrified, "What?" On the screen, my mother's eyes narrowed. "I know you will crawl out of whatever hole you live in when I am gone," she said, her voice a low, vicious growl. "I knew you would try this. I have known who you are my entire life. You are greedy, pathetic, parasitic trash. You sold your own child, my daughter, for $5,000. You thought I would let you or your weak-minded brother touch 1 cent of her inheritance." She leaned in closer to the camera. "Good luck in hell." The video went black. The courtroom was in absolute stunned dead silence. Slocum had collapsed into his chair, his mouth open, his face gray. Chloe in the row behind him had her eyes closed. Jerome was bright, beet red, vibrating with a rage he could not unleash. And Brenda just looked, gone, hollowed out. Mother Thompson from the church was openly crying her hand over her heart. She was not crying for Jerome. She was crying for us, tears of shame. Judge Alston slowly, deliberately took off her glasses. She polished them on a cloth. She put them back on. She looked at Slocum, but she spoke to the entire room. "Mr. Slocum," she said, her voice shaking with a controlled, righteous fury, "this is not just a frivolous lawsuit. This is not just a waste of the court's time. This is a malicious, predatory, and frankly evil attempt to defraud this court, to defame the dead, and to terrorize this young woman." She picked up her gavel. "The petition is dismissed, with prejudice." The gavel cracked like a gunshot. "The emergency freeze on the estate of Serafina Johnson and all associated personal accounts of Ms. Imani Washington is dissolved effective immediately." The gavel cracked again. "And I am not finished," she roared. "This court has witnessed multiple blatant and horrifying felonies. I am referring this entire case, Mr. and Mrs. Washington, Mr. Marcus Johnson, and you, Mr. Slocum, for your complicity, to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal perjury, and attempted elder abuse." The courtroom erupted. Bailiffs were already moving toward Marcus, who had put his head in his hands and was sobbing. But Jerome snapped. He was not a schemer. He was not smart. He was just a violent, desperate animal. With a roar, he lunged. He vaulted the low wooden partition between the gallery and the court. "You!" he screamed, his face purple, his eyes bulging. "You did this. You ruined us, you little—" When he was 2 feet away from me, the bailiffs were on him, a blur of motion, but I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not even back up. I stood up. I stood up and I looked down at the pathetic, pathetic man who was my biological father as he was pinned screaming to the courtroom floor. The room was in chaos, and in the middle of it, I was perfectly, utterly calm. I looked down at his face contorted with rage. "You did not ruin us," I said, and my voice was clear. It did not shake. It cut through the noise. He stopped struggling just for a second to look at me. "You destroyed yourselves," I said, looking him dead in the eyes. "You did it 16 years ago at a bus station. $5,000. That was the price for your souls." I turned my back on him as the bailiffs dragged him cuffed and still screaming out of the courtroom. I turned my back and I looked at Mrs. Hayes, and for the first time in my entire life, I was completely and totally free. The chaos in the courtroom was just the beginning. The fallout was immediate. The judge, true to her word, referred the case to the district attorney. Jerome, Brenda, and Marcus were all facing a slew of serious criminal charges, conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal perjury, and even attempted elder abuse. The video of Marcus trying to force a signature and the audio of the nurse admitting to a bribe was undeniable. They were no longer just greedy relatives. They were criminals. The news spread through the community like a wildfire. The trial, especially Serafina's message from the grave, became the talk of Atlanta. It was a story of betrayal, justice, and a dead woman's brilliant final checkmate. And then the apologies began. They came in a flood. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, was suddenly full of messages from concerned church members. The pastor called, his voice thick with a deep booming and very late arriving regret. He invited me to lead a prayer the following Sunday. I declined. But the most significant visit came one evening. I was in the library, my mother's library, when the doorbell chimed. I looked at the security camera. It was Mother Thompson, the matriarch from the church, the woman who had looked at me with such disappointment. I let her in. She stood in the grand foyer holding a coconut cake. She looked small. "Imani," she said, not meeting my eyes. I have come to beg your forgiveness." I just waited. I, we listened to gossip," she said, her voice thick. "We judged you. We, I called you a shame before God. And all the while, you were the one being persecuted." She finally looked at me, her eyes wet with tears. That video. Your mother, Serafina. She was a lioness, and we believed the jackals." She held out the cake. "I know this does not fix it, but I am just so sorry, child." I took the cake. "Thank you, Mother Thompson. I appreciate you coming." I accepted the apology. But as I watched her leave, I knew something inside me had changed. I no longer needed her approval. I no longer needed any of their approval. The verdict had been an ending, but the real victory was my own quiet freedom from their opinions. Not everyone was so sentimental. Chloe, the white lawyer, the brain of the operation, had her own much colder form of justice. 2 days after the hearing, as Marcus was trying to scrape together bail money, he was served with papers. She had filed for divorce. She cited irreconcilable differences and financial fraud. She was not just leaving him. She was in her own sharp legal way gutting him. She was cutting her losses. He was no longer an asset. He was a liability. A broke, disgraced, and soon-to-be convicted liability. She was a shark, and he was just dead weight. She, I knew, would be just fine. About a month later, I was in the house, a house that was finally starting to feel like my own. Mrs. Hayes had unfrozen everything. The power was on. The nonprofit had called begging me to come back. I had told them I would think about it. I was packing. Not to leave, but to change. I was packing up Serafina's clothes to donate. It was a sad but necessary goodbye. The doorbell rang. I looked at the camera. My blood went cold. It was Brenda. She was alone. She looked ravaged. She was thin, her hair was uncombed, and she was wearing a cheap tracksuit. The cheap bravado, the greedy confidence. It was all gone. She looked like what she was, a desperate, broken woman. I almost did not answer. But I knew I had to. This was the last ghost. I opened the door. She just stared at me, her eyes wide and hollow. "Imani," she whispered. "What do you want, Brenda?" "Please," she choked, and she took a step forward. "Please don't call me that." She fell to her knees, right there on the expensive welcome mat. She grabbed the hem of my jeans. Imani, my baby, please. You have to help me. I did not move. I just looked down at her. Help you. Jerome, he's going to jail, she sobbed. And Marcus, they're all. It's all over. And I have nothing. I have no one. Chloe kicked Marcus out his own wife. I'm living in that roach-infested motel. I'm going to be homeless, baby. Please. She looked up, her face a mask of desperate, ugly tears. It was him. It was all him. Jerome. He made me do it. He made me leave you at the bus station. He made me sign those papers. It was always his idea. The lie was so old, so familiar. And as she said it, one final crystal clear memory locked into place. The bus station, 8 years old. Jerome had already walked out the door. He had said, "Come on, Brenda, let's go." And my mother, Brenda, had stopped. She had turned. She had looked at me sitting on that hard plastic chair clutching my bear. Our eyes met. She saw me. She saw her daughter. And in that moment, she had a choice. I watched her face. I saw the brief flicker of something, and then I saw it die. I saw her choose. She turned her back on me, and she walked away. No. I said, my voice quiet but hard as steel. She stopped crying, her head snapping up. No. What? What do you mean, no? He did not make you do anything, Brenda, I said. You stood there, you looked at me, and you chose to walk away. You chose him. No, I knelt down so I was at her level, so she could see my eyes. I forgive you. A flicker of desperate hope lit her face. You do, oh baby. I knew you. I forgive you. I cut her off. Not for you. I forgive you for me. I forgive you because I am done. I am done carrying your weakness. I am done being your victim. I stood up. You chose him 16 years ago, and you chose him again in that courtroom. That is the price for your soul, Brenda. You wanted to be with him. Now you can be. But you are not my mother. You are not my family. You are nothing. I took a step back. Now get off my property. She just knelt there broken. I closed the door. I locked it. And I never, ever looked back. The next day I called Sarah at the nonprofit. I told her I was not coming back. I was grateful, but my life had a different purpose now. 2 months later, I stood in a different office. It was not in my house. It was a bright, airy corner office in a new building in Midtown. My building. The one my mother had owned. The gold lettering on the glass door read, "The Serafina Washington Foundation." I did not go back to my old life. I used the $4 million and the empire she had built to create a new one. A legacy. A foundation dedicated to funding and mentoring young Black female entrepreneurs. Women like her. Women who, with a little help, could build empires of their own. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. I was not a victim. I was not a daughter. I was not even just an heir. I was the boss. My mother, Serafina, had given me a house, and she had given me money. But what she had really given me was the fight. She had given me the tools, and she had given me my freedom, and I was just getting started. This story teaches us that true strength lies in foresight. Serafina's ultimate gift was not just wealth, but the brilliant strategic preparation to protect her legacy. She anticipated her enemy's greed and planned for it, proving that intelligence is the best defense against betrayal. Imani's victory was secured not just by winning, but by her mother's refusal to let evil have the last word. Real power is building a fortress so strong that your abusers simply break themselves against it, freeing you to define your own life. If you have ever had to fight for what is rightfully yours, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of sweet calculated revenge.